The High Evolutionary is about to become a major bad in the MCU, but will he also be one of the keys to the mutants in the MCU? What's up, my comic book comrades? The High Evolutionary is making his MCU debut in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and he may be way more important than you may think. You see, the MCU's High Evolutionary might be responsible or linked to the creation of mutants in the MCU. Why or how? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we dive in, we want to tell you guys about today's sponsor, Factor. After having a couple of kidney stones recently, I've been cleaning up my regular diet and trying to drop a few pounds. Well, Factor makes meeting my nutrition goals stupid easy by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to my doorstep. Their team of top-tier chefs create each meal using the highest quality ingredients to help you feel your best all day long. So if you're like me trying to eat healthy but find yourself short on time to cook healthy meals, with Factor you could skip the trip to the grocery store, the cooking, and the cleanup too. Factor's never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy. I recently got a pack of their Chef's Choice meals and I couldn't believe how good every meal was, especially the creamy Parmesan chicken. Straight up restaurant quality, but with lower calories. Factor also offers great dietitian-approved calorie-smart meals with around or less than 550 calories per serving. In fact, Factor is now owned by HelloFresh, which we've also had as a sponsor before, and they have amazing meals too. So I'm not sure why I waited so long. I'm telling you, you gotta check out Factor for yourself. With a wide array of meal plans to choose from, there's something for everyone, and now you could try it at a discount. Just head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code VARIANT50 to get 50% off your very first box. All right, first and foremost, before getting into how the High Evolutionary could be the key to the mutants in the MCU, we have to get everyone on the same page of who the character is and what he's all about. We did do an Origin of High Evolutionary video, which you can find right here if you want his backstory and origin broken down in detail. But for today's purposes, I'm gonna give you the quick and dirty version. So naughty. The man who would become the High Evolutionary is named Herbert Wyndham. He was born in Manchester, England, and was a student at Oxford in the 1930s. There he became obsessed in the genetic work of Nathaniel Essex, aka the man who would become Mr. Sinister. Inspired by Essex, Herbert would start experimenting with genetic manipulation and built a machine called the Genetic Accelerator. He used said machine to evolve rats in his mom's basement, which we see in X Factor Annual 3. He would soon go to a genetics conference in Genova, where he was approached by an inhuman geneticist named Fader. We learned that he gave Herbert papers that contained the blueprints for cracking the genetic code. This gave Herbert what he needed to take his experiments to the next level, allowing him to create a serum called Isotope A. After this, Herbert would start working with another scientist named Jonathan, the father of Jessica Drew, the first Spider-Woman, which we see in Spider-Woman issue 1 from 1978. Jessica Drew became sick from exposure to uranium, at which point Herbert saw it as an opportunity to inject her with one of his evolutionary serums that he made from spiders. This is the serum that would give her powers that led to her becoming Spider-Woman, meaning Herbert, or the High Evolutionary, was responsible for the creation of Spider-Woman. Herbert would also create the Citadel of Science and create the half-animal humanoid beings he dubbed the New Men, which he talked about in the Mighty Thor 135. Then, of course, one day he decided to accelerate or evolve himself to enhance his mind, calling himself the High Evolutionary, donning his iconic exoskeleton. All of that was important because now that you know what the character is all about in the comic books, you'll start to see where we're going with this. You see, the High Evolutionary is all about genetics and the next stage of human evolution. Literally, evolution is in his name. And what are mutants, or the X gene to be more specific? The next step in human evolution, referred to as Homo superior. Now, in the comic books, High Evolutionary did not create the mutant gene, but as we all know, the MCU likes to change things up from the comics quite often. A perfect example of this is in the season 1 finale of Ms. Marvel, where Kamala Khan's friend Bruno reveals to her after studying her genetics that she has some sort of mutation in her, as the X-Men theme briefly plays, telling us she is the first confirmed 616 MCU mutant, when in the comic books, she's an Inhuman. But this change sparks a theory. In the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 trailers, we see that High Evolutionary will be responsible for the creation of Rocket Raccoon, and we're also assuming he's going to have some sort of hand in Adam Warlock as well. Point is, just by watching the trailers, we know High Evolutionary has been around for several years experimenting on all sorts of beings, trying to create the next step or stage of evolution. With that said, let's go back to Ms. Marvel being the first confirmed 616 mutant in the MCU. Now, she's only 16 years old in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and we can assume based off the trailers for Guardians 3 that High Evolutionary has been experimenting with genetics for a very long time, well before Ms. Marvel was born. Again, she's only 16 years old. So what if he's the one who created the X gene, or at least helped create the X gene with all of his different experiments over the years? And somehow somehow her family crossed paths with High Evolutionary, or it could be something as simple as he created this gene and randomly had it injected into people under the assumption they were getting a normal flu shot or something like that as one of his twisted experiments. Now, like I said earlier, in the comic books, High Evolutionary was also obsessed with genetic biologist Nathaniel Essex, aka Mr. Sinister, one of the X-Men's most dangerous adversaries. Literally, in Marvel Comics, Essex is known as the world's greatest geneticist, being able to clone, create, and control mutants' abilities. I mean, hello, has anyone been reading the Sins of Sinister storyline right now? Perfect example of his genius. And it may or may not be a coincidence that Marvel is spotlighting Mr. Sinister right now. Anyway, the MCU could use Evolutionary as a way to also introduce Mr. Sinister and reveal that together they are responsible for the creation of the X gene, or at least two key components to unlocking it, as again, the MCU deviates from the comic books all the time. So would it be accurate to the source material? No. But if done right, they could still make it cool. Imagine if over the course of Phase 5 and Phase 6, we get flashbacks of a young High Evolutionary working with a young Mr. Sinister in college together, and somehow they unlock the X gene as they both are obsessed with genetics. Heck, they don't even have to do it together. They could have the High Evolutionary pick up where Essex left off, or vice versa. I mean, there's so many different routes you could go with this, that would be awesome. I mean, just think about it. The High Evolutionary was responsible for the powers of the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. You know, the two characters for years who we thought were mutants, only to find out in Uncanny Avengers issue 4 that they were not, and in fact the creation of High Evolutionary. You see, in Uncanny Avengers issue 4, the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver are captured by High Evolutionary in his citadel. He says to them, elevated heart rate, caffeine addiction, insomnia, neurosis, self-doubt, must my failure put themselves on parade? Quicksilver asks, your failures? Evolutionary responds, there are evolutionary missteps on the way to greatness. Missteps like the both of you. Wanda asks, you're our father? He responds, don't be ridiculous. Is the carpenter beholden to every chair, the baker to his morning bread? You are nothing more than the attempt to answer a question. A poor attempt. I took you from your parents when you were babies, made my alterations, then upon my disappointment, returned you to their care disguised as common mutants. Not only confirming that Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are no longer mutants, but the fact that they were only ever thought to be mutants is because of High Evolutionary, who gave them powers, but considered them failed experiments. So he returned them back to their parents, being like, yeah, they have powers because they're mutants. So what I'm saying is the High Evolutionary gave Wanda and Pietro such great powers and abilities, the whole world thought they were mutants. Even the damn mutants thought they were mutants. So actually, the MCU could just flat out do this and have the High Evolutionary experiment on humans years ago and just put them out into the world thinking they were failed experiments, when in reality, he created the X gene. Now, I know what some of you were thinking, how would that line up time-wise when they inevitably introduce Cyclops, Wolverine, and the X-Men? Well, we don't know if we're going to be getting a younger version of the X-Men or an older version of the X-Men, but I mean, you could simply explain that High Evolutionary has clearly experimented on himself, so he could be extremely old for all we know. The point is, we're not saying that the High Evolutionary is definitely going to be the key to the X-Men, but he very well could be. And it would be a smart way to bring in the mutants. Kevin Feige in several recent MCU moments have been teasing and saying they're coming, including the fact that we know that Ms. Marvel is a mutant thanks to this scene.
Kamala, there's something different in your genes, like a mutation.
You heard that little tease of the X-Men theme, right? So hopefully High Evolutionary story arc is our next step to the full introduction of the X-Men and other mutants in the MCU. Because Lord knows we're all dying to see Wolverine, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Jean Grey, and the rest of the X-Men enter the fray. But those are our thoughts and theories for how the High Evolutionary could be the key to introducing the mutants for the MCU. What do you guys think, and what are your theories? Let us know down below.